So moving right along, we have the team working with the International Rescue Committee under the direction of Susanne DesRoches.
So good evening, everyone. My name is Teddy, and on behalf of my entire capstone team, I'll be presenting the results of our project tonight. Over the past few months, we had the opportunity to work very closely with IRC, the International Rescue Committee, to come up with a plan on how their operations can become more sustainable. Before I get into the details of our proposed recommendations, I would first like to give you a brief overview of who our client is and how the organization is structured. IRC was founded in 1933 at the request of Albert Einstein to provide emergency aid and long-term assistance to refugees and people who've been displaced by wars, by political suppressions, or by also climate crises. Today, IRC has grown to a globally operating humanitarian organization with roughly 17,000 staff that work across 50 crisis-affected countries, as you can see here on the map. With their humanitarian support programs, IRC has had a significant impact in 2022. Together with their partners, they reached roughly 33 million people. They provided 8 million health consultations, enrolled roughly 800,000 children in learning programs, but they also served roughly 300,000 people with their resettlement, asylum, and integration work. An important note about IRC's organizational structure is that their operations teams provide the backbone of the organization that basically provide the adequate infrastructure, tools, and equipment for the field service teams. So why does a humanitarian organization such as IRC care about sustainability? First of all, because they're very vulnerable to climate change. I mean, you've all heard about the floodings in Bangladesh, for example, that have been going on. But also, their activities have a significant environmental impact. And lastly, donors, the main funding source of such humanitarian organizations, are increasingly requiring them to have sustainability targets and to work towards them. With that being said, IRC has been motivated to build on its existing work and basically become more sustainable. For this, we gather internal information by conducting roughly 20 interviews with IRC staff, but also by conducting external benchmarking, analyzing roughly 20 comparable organizations, out of which you can see some on the right-hand side. We then analyzed the findings, developed case studies in the form of success stories, and came up with a set of recommendations on what strategic sustainability initiatives can be implemented, where to put the focus on, but also how the initiatives can be enabled or facilitated. The what, where, and how will guide through the next couple of slides, during which I'll give you insights into our proposed recommendations. I'll first provide an overview of all our recommended solutions, their prioritization, but also their useful enablers before I give some more background on two very important initiatives itself. So we identified 7 sustainability initiatives across 5 thematic areas in order to recommend what IRC can do in becoming more sustainable. The first is expanding solar panel deployment in field operations, which not only reduces costs, but also improves reliability in regions with unstable power grids. Second is expanding green procurement guidelines by introducing sustainability requirements for goods and services. We also developed 5 additional sustainability initiatives across the thematic areas of waste and water, resilience, and real estate. However, today's presentation will focus on the first 2 due to time constraints. As a next step, we developed a recommended prioritization of the initiatives in order to help IRC in deciding where to effectively allocate its efforts and resources on. This prioritization is based on assessing the initiatives for 2 main variables, namely overall impact and cost of implementation, but also 3 secondary variables, which are difficulty of implementation, scalability, and implementation timeline. Based on the results, we plotted the initiatives on this matrix, as you can see here, and grouped them according to a high, medium, and low priority level. High priority initiatives, such as green procurement guidelines and solar panel deployment, are those initiatives that come with a high environmental impact and a low cost of implementation. Low priority initiatives would then obviously be the opposite. It's important to mention that this prioritization does not mean that IRC should exclude any of the low priority initiatives, but should rather help them in effectively scaling up their sustainability efforts. We then also identified how the implementation of the initiatives can be facilitated through developing a set of recommended tools and process-enabling activities. These basically are ways on how IRC can roll out their initiatives on a global scale. There's no one enabler-fits-it-all solution, as the proposed enablers vary depending on the initiative itself, the country or region, but also the department. Actions such as defining baselines and hiring sustainability professionals are the initial steps in understanding the department's or region's needs. Additionally, the development of internal tools can inform decision-making, but also help monitor data across different systems. Developing new standard operating procedures, or SOPs, will ensure that IRC is on track of hitting its sustainability goals. Partnerships, for example, with local vendors, governments, or other humanitarian organizations, are a key part of supporting new innovation, but also understanding community needs. And lastly, introducing new funding mechanisms can provide targeted long-term climate change planning within IRC. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I would like to now come to two high-priority initiatives to provide you some more details. So IRC's operations heavily rely on the use of energy, which make up a significant share of their total expenditures. Today, IRC primarily sources or procures its energy from conventional sources such as oil and natural gas. These obviously produce emissions and have a negative impact on the environment. Additionally, another issue is that unreliable energy supply can lead to interruptions of IRC's activities, posing serious consequences. For example, electricity blackouts in camps can lead to the interruption of refrigeration, which can cause temperature-sensitive medicines to go to waste. Therefore, what we recommend IRC to do is, to address these three problem areas, is expanding the deployment of solar panels on a global scale. It provides clean energy that does not pollute the environment, but also lowers IRC's Scope 1 and 2 emissions. It has a short payback period, which can lead to significant cost savings, but also creates independence from the grid, as it is a reliable source of energy. Therefore, solar panels can be regarded as a win-win-win solution. As to where IRC should put its focus on, we recommend implementing this initiative with a high priority, as mentioned earlier. This is because solar panels provide a significant improvement of IRC's environmental footprint, but also they come with cost savings in the midterm, which can be realized shortly after the upfront high investment. One thing to note here is that the regional scalability refers to selected regions in which solar panels might be more applicable than in others. How we recommend IRC to implement this initiative is by using three of the earlier described enablers: hiring sustainability professionals and subject matter experts, leveraging partnerships, but also creating business cases. This is also reflected in two of our research case studies. For example, IRC in Pakistan has been successful in introducing solar panels because basically they had a local climate coordinator in place to drive the project, but they also created a strong business case through the development of a robust cost-benefit analysis model. Similarly, the Norwegian Refuge Council successfully rolled out solar panels as part of their energy transition projects in South Sudan and Jordan by conducting feasibility studies and working with energy experts and local technicians. With IRC's growth in recent years, the complexity of its supply chain has also increased. This has led to many countries having very different procurement requirements. While a few country programs already have green procurement guidelines in place, the majority of goods and services are still ordered on demand only when they're needed, partially also as a result of the nature of IRC's disaster response services. This reactive procurement style does not allow IRC to strategically procure sustainable goods that also come with a lower environmental footprint. Therefore, what we recommend to address these three problem areas is expanding green procurement guidelines across the entire organization. They should provide guidance on selecting or prioritizing those products that have a lower footprint. They incorporate forecasting, which comes with strategic buying of selected goods in larger quantities, which then also cut costs in warehousing and packaging. But also they prevent over-procurement and excessive transportation related to the procured goods, and also therefore reduce waste. As to where IRC should put its focus on, already as mentioned earlier, again, we recommend doing this with a high priority because green procurement guidelines can both lower IRC's environmental footprint, but also come with a low cost of implementation. One thing to note here is, again, that despite scaling this initiative on a global scale, there are country-specific needs and supply chain complexities. For example, some countries might use different energy efficiency ratings, such as Energy Star or EcoStar. How we recommend IRC in implementing this initiative is, again, by using two of the recommended enablers. Again, hiring experts, but also developing new SOPs. This is also reflected by our internal research, as we saw a strong correlation between countries that hired sustainability experts, but also those that had effective green procurement guidelines in place. Additionally, we learned that IRC's pharmaceutical quality assurance team has implemented SOPs to maximize efficiency, but also reduce waste. So with that being said, I'd like to conclude by, first of all, hoping that our recommendations help IRC in becoming more sustainable, but also to the entire team and Susanne for the project work. I'll take your questions.
How, since solar panels are up there in terms of short-term and wide strategy to implement, can you define the challenges of sort of local situations of tapping into existing electric companies and or the storage of energy? Do you think that those restrictions or parameters will affect your recommendations?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think overall, what has to be said is that really depends on the country and the region, right? I mean, there must be better subsidies or more subsidies in some countries and regions. Some countries might be more applicable. I think we've seen during our research a lot of work already being done in African countries, just because they have high solar radiation, but also have had the chance to procure solar panels at a fairly cheap cost. But yeah, in the end, it will depend on multiple factors and is really dependent. So what they started was focusing on their offices, not so much the camps, at least in the more developed countries, as opposed to, you know, where they have very remote camps or refugee camps, for example, where they have already implemented some of those.
Thank you for the great presentation. I saw on the graph overall impact on the x-axis, and I'm curious to know, how do you go about selecting metrics and prioritizing which metrics to use when actually evaluating overall impact for all your solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we were coming from with overall impact was related more to overall environmental impact, and what we meant by that is reducing the environmental impact of IRC or IRC's operations. So basically, as I said, we used those two main variables, overall impact and cost. We also had those like 3 secondary variables. We tried, because we didn't go too much into the quantitative direction, to keep it on a qualitative level by basically having the low, medium, and high, like a 3-scale kind of matrix. And in the end, basically, I mean, that keeps it kind of simple, but helped us to compare all of the initiatives and kind of identifying where IRC should first focus on because it has the best impact, or for example, and the lowest cost, right? That's why it would be a high priority initiative.
Thank you for the presentation. Kind of along the same lines as the previous questions on sort of like the cost and impact matrix. After evaluating the cost, do you have a good understanding of how budget gets allocated at this organization, and kind of if there would be budget in, you know, the upcoming years for something like the solar panel recommendation?
Yeah, great question. I think two things to reflect on this. First of all, again, cost. We didn't do like a super detailed cost analysis, but basically when we compare all of those, you get a feeling of, and based on our research, what kind of initiatives would be that come with a lower cost of implementation. Regarding the budget point, that's one of the key concerns that IRC, but also other humanitarian organizations have been experiencing, is that typically they run on annual budgets. So if you want to invest into like long-term projects, which are, I don't know, can involve like asset-heavy investments for like sustainability work, but also real estate and so on, it becomes a bit more difficult and tricky, especially if you're on the local, country, or even regional level, because typically those fundings decisions are made on a headquarter basis. So one of the things that we've learned is that IRC is trying to set up a new fund to basically better target these long-term kind of investments to get donor funding, especially for that. And other organizations such as ICRC, I think, is already doing that. They have like this separate fund.